Some dangers do not arrive as storms. They enter quietly, carrying familiar names, familiar faces, familiar smiles. They sit at the same table as you, speak your language, share your blood, and because of that, they are never questioned. This is not a story about hatred or open conflict. This is about something far more unsettling, the unseen influence that shapes you from the inside, the presence you were taught to trust without inspection. In families, the deepest wounds are rarely caused by strangers. They are formed in places where love was supposed to protect you. From a young age, you learn a powerful lesson without realizing it. Family is always right. You are taught to forgive quickly, to stay silent longer, to endure more than you should. When something feels wrong, you are told you are sensitive. When you feel hurt, you are reminded of sacrifices. Slowly, instinct is replaced with obedience, and self-trust is exchanged for approval. What you begin to doubt is not their behavior, but your own perception of it. The most dangerous harm is the kind that never announces itself. It hides behind concern, tradition, and good intentions. It does not shout, it whispers. It does not strike, it guides. And over time, it reshapes how you see yourself, what you believe you deserve, how much space you are allowed to occupy, how loudly you are permitted to dream. You call it normal because it is familiar. You call it love because that is what you were taught to call it. This speech is not about blame. It is about awareness, about recognizing the quiet forces that influence your thoughts, your confidence, and your choices without ever asking for permission. Because once you can name what is hidden, it loses its power. And the moment you begin to see clearly, the cycle that controlled generations before you finally begins to break. The smile that teaches you to doubt yourself. There is a particular kind of influence that never announces itself as harmful. It does not arrive with anger, raised voices, or visible conflict. Instead, it arrives with warmth, with politeness, with a smile that feels safe enough to lower your guard. This is the person who never openly disagrees with you, yet somehow, after every conversation, you walk away feeling uncertain about what you said, what you felt, and even what you remember. Nothing dramatic happened, and yet something inside you feels smaller than it did before. At first, the moments are easy to dismiss. A casual correction delivered with a laugh, a gentle reminder framed as a joke, a suggestion that sounds helpful but carries a quiet judgment underneath. You tell yourself it means nothing. You assume good intentions because that is what you were taught to do with family. But repetition has a way of shaping belief. When these small moments happen again and again, they stop feeling accidental. They begin to form a pattern, one that slowly trains you to question yourself before you question them. This is how self-doubt is planted. Not through cruelty, but through subtle inconsistency. One day they praise your decision, the next they imply it was careless. One moment they agree with you, later they claim you misunderstood them. The ground beneath you never feels stable, and because you value harmony, you search for the fault within yourself. You assume you are overthinking, misremembering, or reacting too strongly. Over time, your inner voice grows quieter, while their version of reality grows louder. The most unsettling part is that this influence rarely looks intentional. The person may genuinely believe they are being supportive. They may even see themselves as wise, experienced, or protective. But impact matters more than intent. When someone consistently positions themselves as the quiet authority on what is reasonable or normal, they slowly take ownership of your perception. You stop trusting your instincts and begin outsourcing your judgment to someone who never had to earn that power. In family environments, this dynamic is especially dangerous because it hides behind loyalty. You hesitate to set boundaries because you fear being ungrateful. You hesitate to speak up because you do not want to appear disrespectful. So instead of questioning the pattern, you adapt to it. You explain yourself more. You soften your opinions. You apologize even when no apology is needed. What you call maturity is often just survival disguised as patience. Over time, this quiet influence begins to shape your identity. You become cautious with your words, rehearsing conversations in your mind before they happen. You second-guess decisions that once felt clear. You look for reassurance before taking steps that used to feel natural. The smile across the table remains, but inside you feel constantly evaluated. The cost is not obvious at first, but it accumulates, confidence by confidence, choice by choice. The real damage is not that this person disagrees with you. Disagreement is healthy. The damage comes from the way certainty is slowly taken from you. When someone repeatedly makes you feel confused while appearing calm and reasonable, you begin to associate clarity with conflict. You learn that peace comes from compliance, not truth. And so you choose silence, not because you agree, but because it feels safer than trusting yourself. Many people spend years trapped in this dynamic without naming it. They assume something is wrong with them. They work harder to communicate better, to be more understanding, to be more flexible. But the problem was never a lack of effort. It was the absence of mutual respect. Real respect does not leave you doubting your sanity. Real care does not require you to shrink to maintain harmony. Awareness is the turning point. The moment you notice how often you leave conversations feeling confused instead of clear, something shifts. You begin to observe instead of absorb. You pause before accepting blame that does not belong to you. You remind yourself that uncertainty can be manufactured and that clarity is not arrogance. It is self-trust returning home. This keynote is not about confrontation. It is about recognition, about understanding that the most powerful control does not demand obedience. It trains you to doubt yourself so deeply that you obey without being asked. And once you reclaim trust in your own perception, the smile no longer holds power over you, because clarity, once restored, is something no quiet influence can take away again. The family member who feeds on comparison. Not all harm arrives as direct opposition. Some of it enters the room disguised as motivation, wrapped in stories of success, and presented as harmless observation. This is the family member who never openly attacks you, yet constantly measures you. Every conversation becomes a quiet scoreboard. Every achievement is placed beside someone else's, and without ever saying it outright, a message is delivered. Your worth is relative, never complete on its own. It often begins innocently. A remark at the dinner table about how one sibling was always so focused. A comparison shared with a smile, as if it were encouragement. You are told these comments are meant to inspire you, to push you forward, to help you do better. And because families often confuse pressure with care, you accept it. You nod. You stay silent. You internalize the belief that being compared is a normal part of being loved. But comparison does not inspire growth. It creates tension. It teaches you to measure yourself through someone else's life. Instead of discovering who you are, you begin monitoring where you stand. You celebrate less freely because attention invites measurement. You struggle privately because vulnerability might lower your rank. Slowly, connection is replaced by competition, and trust gives way to quiet resentment. The person who feeds on comparison rarely appears cruel. In fact, they often present themselves as fair, objective, and observant. They claim they are simply pointing out differences, highlighting potential or acknowledging effort. Yet their words never exist in isolation. They form a pattern, one where praise is conditional, approval is selective, and love feels earned rather than given. You are never allowed to simply be. You are always being weighed. What makes this dynamic especially damaging is how it divides relationships that should feel safe. Siblings stop seeing each other as allies. Cousins become benchmarks instead of companions. Even parents are unknowingly pulled into roles of judges rather than nurturers. The family does not fall apart loudly. It fragments quietly through unspoken rivalries and guarded interactions. Everyone feels it, but no one names it. Over time, comparison begins to shape your inner dialogue. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" You ask, "How do I measure up?" Success feels incomplete if it is not witnessed or validated. Failure feels heavier because it seems public, even when it is private. You begin living in reaction, not to your own values, but to someone else's expectations. And the most painful part is that you may never realize why peace feels so far away. The family member who thrives on comparison often gains a sense of control from it. By positioning themselves as the observer, they remain above the scale. They do not need to compete because they define the competition. Their influence grows as others seek their approval or fear their judgment. Without raising their voice, they shape the emotional climate of the family, one where everyone is careful, guarded, and slightly on edge. This environment teaches a dangerous lesson that love is conditional and belonging must be earned. When praise is given to one person at the expense of another, it stops being encouragement and becomes a tool. And when repeated often enough, it convinces people that their value depends on outperforming those closest to them. That belief does not create excellence, it creates exhaustion. Breaking free from this pattern begins with recognizing that comparison is not truth, it is a strategy. It simplifies complex human lives into shallow measurements. It ignores timing, context, struggle, and individuality. Your journey cannot be fairly measured against someone else's because it was never meant to follow the same path. The moment you stop participating in comparison, you reclaim something powerful: your autonomy. This keynote is not a call to confrontation, but to clarity. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not less. You are simply on your own timeline. And when you stop allowing others to define your worth through comparison, the invisible chains loosen. Growth becomes personal again. Relationships become lighter, and the quiet competition that once divided the family loses its grip, because comparison only survives where people forget their own value. The voice that calls control concern. Some forms of control never feel like control at all. They arrive wrapped in worry, spoken in gentle tones, and justified with phrases that sound responsible and loving. This is the voice that says it is only trying to help, only trying to protect, only trying to guide you away from mistakes. And because it speaks the language of care, it is rarely questioned. Yet over time, that voice does not strengthen you. It quietly replaces you. At first, the guidance feels comforting. Someone is paying attention. Someone is invested in your choices. They ask where you are going, who you are with, what you are planning. They offer advice before you ask for it and opinions before you finish your sentence. You tell yourself this is what family does. You accept the closeness as proof of love, unaware that the line between support and control is slowly being crossed. The shift happens gradually. Suggestions become expectations. Advice becomes correction. Your choices are met with concern if they align, and unease if they do not. When you move in a direction they would not choose, their tone changes, not to anger, but to disappointment. You are not told you are wrong. You are made to feel unsafe being right on your own terms. And because no rule is ever stated clearly, you adjust yourself to avoid that discomfort. This is how autonomy is eroded, not through force but through dependence. You begin to consult them before making decisions, even small ones. You seek reassurance not because you need it, but because you have been trained to doubt your judgment. Over time, you confuse their approval with security, and their disapproval with danger. The world feels manageable only when it is filtered through their perspective. What makes this dynamic especially powerful is how difficult it is to challenge. If you push back, you are told they are only worried. If you ask for space, you are reminded of sacrifices. If you assert independence, you are met with emotional distance rather than open conflict. You are not punished loudly, you are withheld from quietly, and that quiet withdrawal teaches you to stay in line more effectively than any argument could. In families, this pattern often passes as responsibility. Elders are expected to guide, parents are expected to protect, but guidance that does not evolve into trust becomes control. Protection that does not allow risk becomes confinement. When concern is used to limit rather than prepare, it stops being love and starts becoming fear. Fear of losing relevance, fear of losing influence, fear of being unnecessary. The long-term cost of this kind of control is profound. You may appear functional on the outside, yet feel uncertain inside. Decision-making becomes stressful rather than empowering. You hesitate, overanalyze, and seek validation for choices that should feel personal. Even when physically independent, you remain emotionally tethered, unsure whether you are living your life or fulfilling someone else's comfort. Many people raised under this influence struggle to identify their own desires. They know what is acceptable, what is approved, and what is expected, but not what truly resonates with them. The inner compass, once ignored long enough, grows quiet, and when challenges arise, they feel unprepared. Not because they lack ability, but because they were never allowed to practice trusting themselves. Awareness begins when you ask a simple question: is this concern helping me grow or keeping me small? Real care equips you with skills, not fear. It encourages learning, not dependence. It accepts mistakes as part of becoming, not as threats to be avoided at all costs. When concern repeatedly limits your movement instead of strengthening your confidence, it is no longer serving you. This keynote is not about rejecting care, but redefining it. True support does not require constant permission. True guidance does not demand obedience. And true love does not panic at your independence. The moment you recognize the difference, you begin to reclaim your agency. You start making choices from clarity instead of caution, from trust instead of fear. And in that quiet reclaiming, the voice that once controlled your path slowly loses its authority, because your life no longer needs permission to move forward. The one who thrives when you stay small. Not everyone who stands in your way does so openly. Some people never criticize your dreams directly, never forbid your growth, never tell you to stop. Instead, they do something far more subtle. They make expansion feel uncomfortable. This is the family member who appears supportive on the surface, yet grows distant, uneasy, or unusually quiet whenever you begin to rise. Their discomfort is never explained, but it is deeply felt. At first, you may not notice it. You share good news and receive a measured response. You speak about ambition and are met with practical warnings. You talk about change and hear reminders of stability. None of it sounds harmful. In fact, it sounds reasonable. But over time, a pattern emerges. Enthusiasm is met with restraint, courage with caution, and growth with subtle doubt. You begin to edit your excitement before it leaves your mouth. This dynamic often comes from unspoken fear rather than ill intent. Your growth challenges the roles people have grown comfortable with. When you change, the family system must adjust, and not everyone is ready for that. Your progress reflects possibilities they did not pursue, risks they avoided, or paths they abandoned. Without saying a word, your movement forward becomes a mirror they did not ask to look into. Instead of confronting that discomfort, they manage it by minimizing your expansion. They encourage you to be realistic. They remind you of responsibilities. They highlight obstacles before you have even begun. These responses are framed as wisdom, but they carry a quiet message: stay where you are. And because the words come from someone close, they land heavier than any outside criticism ever could. Over time, you internalize this restraint. You hesitate before setting goals. You downplay achievements to avoid tension. You choose safer paths, not because they align with you, but because they feel less disruptive. You learn that being smaller keeps the peace, and that ambition requires emotional labor you are tired of performing. What begins as consideration slowly becomes self-limitation. The most painful part of this dynamic is that it distorts your relationship with success. Instead of joy, achievement brings guilt. Instead of pride, progress brings anxiety. You worry about how your growth will be received rather than how it fulfills you. You carry the weight of other people's comfort on your shoulders, believing it is your responsibility to move carefully so others do not feel left behind. This influence is powerful because it rarely demands anything outright. There are no rules, no ultimatums, no open resistance. Just a subtle shift in atmosphere when you step into your potential. And because humans are wired for belonging, you instinctively adapt. You shrink without being asked. You delay without being told. You learn to trade expansion for acceptance. But growth was never meant to be negotiated. Your life is not a compromise between your potential and someone else's insecurity. When someone benefits from you staying small, emotionally, intellectually, or professionally, it is not because your growth is wrong. It is because your growth changes a dynamic that once served them, and that discomfort, however real, is not yours to carry. Awareness begins when you notice how often you silence your excitement, when you recognize the difference between caution that protects and caution that restrains. True support does not require you to dull your light. It does not ask you to apologize for evolving. It celebrates movement even when it challenges familiar roles. This keynote is about permission, not from others but from yourself. Permission to outgrow old expectations. Permission to succeed without guilt. Permission to expand even if it makes the room quieter. Because the moment you stop shrinking to keep others comfortable, something powerful happens. Your confidence returns, your direction sharpens, and the influence that once thrived on your smallness loses its hold. Growth does not need approval, it only needs honesty. The silence that protects the wrong person. Not all damage is caused by action. Some of the deepest harm is sustained through inaction, through the quiet, collective decision to look away. In many families, there is an unspoken agreement to keep peace at any cost, even when that peace is built on denial. This is the silence that surrounds harmful patterns, shields certain individuals from accountability, and teaches everyone else to endure quietly. Silence often begins as self-protection. Speaking up feels risky, it threatens harmony, invites conflict, and challenges long-standing roles. So instead of naming what feels wrong, people minimize it. They explain it away as stress, personality, or tradition. Over time, these explanations become reflexes. The truth is not confronted, it is carefully avoided, and in that avoidance, silence becomes a powerful force. What makes this silence dangerous is that it does not feel cruel. It feels practical. Let it go, they say. It's just how they are. Don't make it worse. These phrases sound reasonable, even wise, but beneath them lies a message that shapes behavior. Some people are allowed to cause harm, and others are expected to absorb it. The family does not correct the pattern, it manages it. The person being protected may not even demand this silence. They benefit from it without asking. Each time an incident is ignored, their behavior is normalized. Each time a concern is dismissed, accountability is postponed. The absence of consequences teaches them that nothing needs to change. Meanwhile, those affected learn a different lesson, that their discomfort is inconvenient and their voice is optional. Over time, this environment trains people to self-censor. They choose their words carefully, avoid certain topics, and adjust their reactions to maintain balance. Emotional honesty becomes a threat rather than a bridge. The family appears functional from the outside, yet inside, conversations are filtered and feelings are stored away rather than expressed. Silence becomes the glue holding everything together, even as it slowly erodes trust. The cost of this silence is not evenly distributed. Those who speak less carry more. They absorb tension, suppress emotion, and question their right to feel hurt. They may even take responsibility for the behavior of others, believing that if they were more patient, more understanding, or more forgiving, things would improve. But silence does not heal, it only delays reckoning. Generations can grow up inside this pattern, learning that peace means compliance and love means endurance. Children observe what is not said more closely than what is. They learn who is allowed to speak and who must remain quiet. And without anyone intending it, the cycle continues, passed down not through instruction, but through example. Breaking this silence does not require confrontation or blame. It begins with acknowledgement, with the courage to name what is happening, even if only to yourself at first. Awareness disrupts the pattern because silence relies on confusion and doubt. When you recognize that quiet endurance is not the same as strength, something shifts internally. This keynote is not a call to create conflict, but to restore balance. Healthy families do not protect behavior that harms. They protect the people who are affected by it. They allow discomfort to surface so healing can begin. Silence may feel safe in the moment, but it is never neutral. It always takes a side.